Hello everyone, thanks for coming outside today. As we approach closer to the season, a lot of people have asked how I sight in my bow and what's the whole process for me to sight in my bow. So I figured I'd go ahead and make a video about that. And before I sight in my bow, I will say that I do start with paper tuning. I have a table set up behind the camera there. I just have an old priority mailbox cut out on both sides and just one 8.5 by 11 sheet of copier paper taped to the front. So I'll say this first, before you paper tune, before you sight in your bow, make sure your bow is tuned. Make sure your center shot is on. Make sure your tiller is good. Make sure everything is squared away with your bow. So for me, my bow is tuned. I have my paper tuning set up here. All I'm going to do is set this on a table about 15 feet away from this chair right here that I'm going to be shooting out of. I like to be about 10 to 15 feet away for paper tuning, and then actually I will set this later at about 15-20 yards, and I will shoot at it again there to see how my arrow is flying at that distance. Some people think that's absolutely ridiculous. I personally like that comfort of knowing that my arrow, where it's tuning right here in front of me, will be flying exactly the same as it will be 20 yards away. So I'm going to put this on the table, take a few shots, and show you what I'm looking for with a good paper tuned arrow. Okay, so my paper tuning box there is about 15 feet down range. I'd say probably about 3 or 4 yards behind it is my target. You want to make sure that your target isn't so close that when the arrow starts to go through the paper that it doesn't contact the target first too soon before it makes it all the way through the paper. You'll get some really weird looking tears, so make sure it's well behind it. Also, I'm going to shoot only the same arrow when I'm paper tuning. So we're going to take a shot here and see what kind of hole or tear we get. Okay, as it's expected, it is a perfect bullet hole because I have this bow tuned. But we'll put an arrow in here in this bow that I know is not going to be tuned for this bow. We'll shoot it and we'll see what that tear looks like. So the last arrow I shot was a 300 spine arrow. This is a 400 spine arrow. Both cut to the same length of 30 inches, both using a 100 grain point, but we're going to see how much difference the tear is with this shot here. Let's go take a look. Looking at these two shots, you can see why it's so important to have an arrow that is the correct spine and the correct length and the correct point weight for your bow before you start sighting it and tuning it. This guy is that perfect bullet hole we all want when we're paper tuning. That's that 300 spine Easton arrow. Over here, we have the 400 spine gold tip. So you have a pretty nasty low and sideways tear as compared to this nice perfect bullet hole over here. Have an arrow that's correctly tuned for your bow. Now, of course, we are tuning these arrows right now. So, of course, you know, if there's some adjustments to make, there's some adjustments to make. But if you start out with an arrow that's perfectly tuned, or that should be perfectly tuned, out of a perfectly tuned bow, you know, one that's the cams are in sync, the center shot's aligned, you're going to be fine. So this isn't a comprehensive video on paper tuning, like what you need to do left and right. For that, I've put a link in the description below of a video on YouTube here that is fantastic. It's a great resource for paper tuning, so I highly recommend you watch that. I'm going to move on to step 2, which is assuming I'm shooting a perfect bullet hole. Now I can move into sighting my bow. So now I'm ready to sight the bow in, and so there are 2 things I'm going to start with. I'm going to start at a very close distance, and I'm going to start at figuring out left and right. As you see here on the left hand side, about a 9-inch piece of 1 inch wide masking tape, and over here on the right hand side I have the horizontal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start about 10-15 feet from the target and make sure that my sight housing is right, and I'm just going to move the whole sight housing. If I had a sight where I could move all 5, 4, or 3 pins independently, what I would do is I would put that top pin roughly to the top of the housing, or at least as far as I can tolerate it as I look at it through my peep. Top pin on perfect, just leave it right there on the top of the housing, and then move the whole housing up, down, left, and right, and then for 30, 40, and 50, and so on, I move those individual pins. Now, I start at such a close distance to the target because normally when you get a bow and you paper tune and you buy it brand new, you throw everything on, it could be way off, and if you start at 20 yards, you could be shooting super high or super low, and you could miss, have a potentially dangerous situation, or break an arrow or something like that. So I know this bow is already set up well beyond 10-15 feet, so I'm going to set it out here to 20 yards. I'm going to shoot a group. I'm going to shoot 3 arrows, see where they all fit left and right, and then we'll see if we need to fix horizontal. So of course you want to try to paper tune and sight in your bow on a day where there's no wind, as you can probably hear right now. That's not the case here in Pennsylvania, but it's what we have for now. You also notice that my arrows all appear that they're flying into the target at weird angles. That's because as they're hitting this side of the target, that target was spinning like this, and so they were entering the target at different angles. So I know that that's not a bow's problem because I've paper tuned already, and I know that it has a good flight coming out of the bow. So I know this angle issue is not a bow problem. This shot here was just a fuzz off, but I mean, as you can see, the other two nailed the tape dead center practically. As you notice here, I just put a 20-yard pin here, and then to make sure I didn't hit that arrow, I just moved down a little bit, then down a little bit, just kept going down the tape. So now I can shoot at a spot or at a horizontal line, and I can try to figure out my 20, 30, and 40-yard pins. So now you can set your 20, your 30, your 40, whatever pins you're going to set. Now that you've figured out your left and right with your 20, you can go ahead and start setting in your pins. Now, a few things to be cautious of because these are mistakes I've made in the past I'd like to warn you about. Thing number one is do not just shoot one arrow and then keep moving your sight based on that one arrow. A one arrow shot is not an indicator of your grouping, and particularly if you're new. You know the adage, a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then. You might shoot that one arrow, perfect bullet hole. You think, great, and you move right into walkback tuning. You just keep doing your thing, but you see arrows that are corkscrewing or fishtailing or not looking right down range. You go back to paper tune and you have a nasty tear to the left. So it's really important that you nail down consistent form so you have a consistent release, so you get consistent tears, consistent bullet holes, and consistent groups downrange. So that's all for this video. If you have any other questions about how I sight in or tune my equipment, feel free to pop over to Facebook and send me a message there or leave me a comment here on YouTube. I get back to everybody as soon as I can. I hope you're able to get out and shoot your bow, sight it in, tune it, whatever it needs to be. I hope you enjoy the sport of archery hunting if you so choose. Of course, enjoy the beautiful creation God has given us, and we'll get to see you next time.